Are you looking for more out of your life? Do you need ideas on how to start new businesses and how to move forward in your own personal life? Well, guess what? You have come to the right radio show. At You Can Overcome Anything podcast show, you will learn and hear from many people from all walks of life who are sharing their challenges, their stories, the habits, and the mind shifts they had to overcome to become who they are today. On top, you will get a chance to connect and see how you can overcome anything by networking and learning about your next move through this radio show. I present to you our great speakers at You Can Overcome Anything podcast show with your host, Cesar Espino. Hello there, and welcome back to another episode of You Can Overcome Anything podcast show. It is your host, Cesar Espino. And today I have a special guest. I'll start by giving you a little bit about her background. Kristena not only grew up in very unique circumstances, taking care of mentally handicapped adults, but also experienced the all too familiar cycle of abuse. It wasn't until she divorced her first husband that everything started to fall into place and grow. Her career in tech really took off, even thought she had never finished a college degree. Her internal dialogue was shifting, and she was finally seeing herself through the eyes of those who loved her the most. Although Kristena did build a fantastic 16-year career in tech, it was the home and family that she built for her kids that is the real success. Welcome, Kristena. How are you today?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Good. I'm excited to have you here. So definitely that's fascinating to kind of see that. And, I love what you mentioned at the end, that your true success is building that home for your kids, right? I often don't see that, right? People might come up and talk about success in a different way. So that's actually huge. Tell me a little bit about you. Tell me where are you originally from and your upbringing. How was that?
So I've lived around the Midwest most of my life. I was actually a one-night stand when my mother conceived me. She was already a single mom of 3 boys. So she had moved back to a very, very small town in Missouri. So small that when she owed people money, they would call her mother to let her know that her daughter owed her money.
Yeah.
She obviously had great taste in men because my father was a drug addict, motorcycle rebel that would ride through town. Not sure why she picked him, but so ultimately we were there for a while, long enough for her to have a second one-night stand with the same man, and give me my only full-blooded sibling. I have lots and lots of half siblings.
Gotcha.
A lot of them came out of Missouri.
Yeah.
Father rode around.
It's a small town.
Yep. And then from there, that's just the roller coaster started. My mom was a single mom of 5 kids at that point. Not really in a healthy place herself, coming from her own cycle of trauma. And ultimately, she was in survival mode. So she ended up remarrying her second husband, who had just gotten out of prison, who had assaulted one of my siblings as well. So she moved us into a home with him and remarried him.
Yeah.
And I remember my dad visiting once or twice. I had another half sister that was just a few months older than me. 82 was a big year for pregnancies in small town Missouri.
Yeah, there was not that many TVs, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, not much to do there.
Right.
But ultimately, I was old enough to remember the night that my dad showed up in a camper with his father in the middle of the night to pack us all up to leave that home, which was not a good home.
Yeah, right.
My stepdad came back, kidnapped my brother. Like, it was just, I remember knives being thrown. It was a crazy night. I was relieved to be out of that situation. I was very young. One of my earliest memories is volunteering myself in place of my little sister, because my stepdad would make us take turns while my mom was at work at night. Unfortunately, although I loved my dad very much. He was not a good father.
Yeah.
He was in his own bad place. So he went from being, he would tell the story of how he gave up his tickets to the Bahamas to come pick us up in Oklahoma. So he now had 5 children,
Wow.
3 of which were not his own. Um, and that started a whole new cycle of abuse, of physical abuse.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, for me and my older siblings, it was pretty much daily for at least until early teenage years. Um, and on top of that, we lived in a group home with
Yeah.
mentally handicapped adults that we would take care of.
Wow.
So that, and it was, we lived in small town Kansas at that point. So I had all kinds of nicknames in school because we drove around in this big old van full of mentally handicapped adults. Whereas I had a soft spot in my heart for them because I lived with them day in and day out. And I knew their personalities and how much love they had for people. Other people obviously don't
Right.
see it this way.
Yeah, it was that makes perfect sense in terms of why again the biggest success for you is being able to build something for your family, for your kids, right? Because obviously a lot of people don't see it, and regardless of what your upbringing might be, that childhood trauma and what you go through and all of that, it really follows you all the way through the end, right? Many people know that between the age of 0 and 7 is when you start building all of these memories, and all of that stays with you unless you work with it. And even if you try to block it off from your mind and you say, that's it, I'm moving on, whatever the case may be, except you don't do any kind of work with that, it'll show up to you down the line in your adult years, right?
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that's definitely huge. And on top of that, there's a lot more of that going on even now with just not only in families, like you said, you're being called names and things like that. There's a lot of bullying that takes place from that perspective, right?
Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, being different is not good as a kid. As an adult, you're like, yeah, this is great. I love being different.
Right. I want to be different, because I have a
Yeah.
unique, something unique for sure. Yeah. So at what point did you kind of, obviously going into your teens and having going through all of that stuff, and even having a lot of that physical and verbal abuse and all that stuff, at which point did you kind of started, finding out your own self and saying, you know what, I'm aware of what's going on, and at the same time I cannot allow this to continue to happen, or when did that take place for you?
Oh, way too late.
Yeah.
I was definitely in my 30s. I mean, really what prompted my divorce, I mean, I had put up with the abuse towards me for years.
What time did you first get married?
I was 20 years old.
Okay.
I met him when I was 15.
Ah.
And I can tell you, I was that 15-year-old kid that was like, no, I've got life figured out. Like,
Yeah.
and I had huge ambitions,
Yeah.
enormous ambitions.
Was he around the same age as you or older than you?
He's like a year and a half older than me. So we met
Gotcha.
in high school and
Yeah.
dated off and on all through high school, which was probably a sign that we shouldn't have gotten married
Right.
because we couldn't stay dating for very
Yeah.
long.
Right.
But he was this intelligent, well-spoken person.
Mm-hmm.
And I just knew that this was going to be the person that was going to break this cycle, and
Right.
he had the same aspirations. His parents came from really rough backgrounds. He had his own issues through childhood, and we were in it together. Like we were going to do this. And Lord, I could not tell you what changed. He was always a little bit controlling, but then after our first kid was born, things just went berserks. But I wasn't going to leave for that. Like I was like, every marriage has its really
Right.
dark places. I
Right.
mean, especially you talk to some women that are my grandparents' age and the dark stuff that they went through, man.
And you're like, they're still together, we got to push through, and right.
Yeah, you just keep going, and eventually we come out the other side of this. But man, the day that he was screaming at me for hours in front of our oldest, who was probably about 5 at the time, and she's bawling and trying to comfort me and giving me Kleenexes, and And I finally stopped crying enough to say, we cannot do this in front of our children. And his response was, they need to see reality. I will drag them into this every time. And that's when it was like, nope.
No.
Like, we're not. I remember getting hit in the head with batteries when my mom was chucking them at my dad.
Yeah. You're like, I'm not going to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not willing to place that value on myself, but as parents, we tend to place more value on our children anyway.
Right.
And that was the eye opener for me.
Yeah. Do you think that when you guys were first dating and kind of decided to, we're gonna be a couple, do you feel that perhaps you were both looking to save each other from your
Yeah.
situation? Because I mean, a lot of times, when you're, when you go through a lot of those challenges, right? What the first thing that people do is like, where can I find that comfort, or where can I find that community, or where can I find that missing piece that I don't have home, that love per se, or whatever that might be, right? Without even realizing, and again thinking that you're essentially still attracting that because you haven't really worked on yourself, right? You haven't really seek deep down to see, okay, what exactly is it that I need, to be able to get there, right?
Yeah. I think it's more we both saw the ambition in each other and the possibilities, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely hadn't done any work at that point. And I was way more willing to put up with kind of that tough love, it was just very, very, I was head over heels in love with them. There was no doubt about that.
Right.
And then I also had a mom. I would have described her as my best friend when I was a kid. And then you grow up and you're like, wait a second. There's a lot of red flags in that relationship. But she firmly believed that being in love was the only thing that mattered. And so she fed that idea that because I was head over heels in love with him, that's all that we needed.
Mm-hmm.
And so we kept coming back to each other and kept coming back to each other. I know now as a healthy adult that you can fall in love over and over again, but there's no depth to that
Right.
love,
Yeah. Yeah. Along those lines, and just kind of get your perspective on that. What do you think will be a good balanced relationship? Right. Obviously, definitely there's going to be that attraction, that love. Except as you mentioned, that is not all. You're right. There's more than that. So, what do you think are the components, or to having that balanced relationship with somebody?
What I tell my dear siblings who keep wanting to jump into marriage is that one, you should be at the point where you're choosing to love that person. They're not perfect, and you've come to realize that. But I think the other part is whatever their flaws are, you have to be perfectly happy with them, that they will never change. And I'm remarried now. I love my husband. A very, very different story of falling in love. It was never butterflies. It was this slow, steady. It was easy, which is weird. But and all of his flaws of rearranging my kitchen cabinets every time he touches the dishes, it's never anything that I'm going to fight with him over. Like whatever his flaws are, I accepted them before I ever chose to marry him, and I will never ask him to change any of them.
Right.
And I think that starts so many fights in a marriage, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
we think this person's going to change this habit that annoys the crap out of us.
Right. Yeah. No, that definitely. So, definitely, you're going through all this. You said, okay, that's it. I had enough. I'm not gonna put my kids through this. What was the next step on your journey?
Oh, that was the hardest time of my life. And my mom will tell you that I wasn't going to leave. It was his ultimatum. I just wanted to separate, reset, go back to ground zero and build a stronger foundation than what we had ever had, because we were now grown adults with kids. And but he very much, it was either we're divorced or we're living together. And I absolutely knew I couldn't live with him. So I had to walk through that. And he went from, giving me cards saying how I was the best mother he could ever want for his kids, to saying all kinds of crazy stuff and being combative and horrible. And it was hard. I remember telling my mom, I think it's easier if I just go back. And she goes, if this were your daughter, would you want her to go back? I was like, heck no.
Right.
Like, well, then you don't go back.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I did. I had a therapist by that point, because he had me convinced I was crazy and I was the whole problem. And I definitely didn't have the mental grounding to logically combat that in my own mind. I needed that external force to say, no, let's talk through this. Like, let's
Right.
say this all out loud so you can see. Um, and that's when a lot of the healing really started. I started to have enough energy to work on myself, whereas before there was no energy left between working and raising kids and dealing with the situations that I was in with my ex-husband. Um, and I forget who told me, but I was 31, 32 years old, however old I was, and they were like, "Oh, this flower is finally blooming." Like
Ah,
this person that you were before you were in this relationship for 15 years, like that person is finally coming out. And it's amazing. Like once you are out of a situation, I mean, I'd spent the first 30 years of my life with one
yeah,
abusive man after another.
right.
And I had so many people in my life that I thought their mean comments, was that toughness that will sharpen the blade kind of mentality.
Right.
I got rid of all of it. I
Yeah.
mean, I was done. Either you loved me and you saw the best in me, or I had no capacity for you in my life. Um, and having been together for 15 years, I lost all my friends.
Hmm.
I was unwilling to talk about the things that happened, and he was willing to tell everyone a story that was easy to believe about me. We grew up in this group of Christians, and I was never the good Christian wife like all these other women. I
Right.
worked, I had opinions.
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought we were equal partners in the marriage, not that he gets to make all these decisions and I have to follow along. Um, so the story he told was very easy for them to believe, that I didn't want to work with somebody else to make decisions. I wanted to go do my own thing.
Yeah. Making you the bad person.
Yeah. And I was like, you know what? If they believe that, they're not
Right.
my friend in the first place. So,
Yeah.
so having to rebuild friendships and meet new people when you're in your 30s,
Yeah.
um, it
Now
was,
looking, yeah, and even looking back now, though, right? I mean, that definitely, as you mentioned, you kind of have that transformational awareness, in your 30s. Um, do you feel though, because a lot of people say, well, it's I'm too old, I'm too young. They're always using the idea of the age, right, to be able to take action and do something. Looking back now, though, obviously you went through a lot of stuff, yet that also has helped you build who you are now. And at the same time, though, do you feel like this is your best time in your life? I mean, is there an age, where like age matters, or really you're in your best time in your life?
I feel like it just keeps getting better. Like,
Hmm.
I finally got to finish my bachelor's degree just 3 years ago or so.
Yeah.
That was a huge thing for me. I always thought I was going to be a PhD. Maybe
Yeah.
someday I still will.
Right.
Um, and then my career took off after I was out of that situation, and I could have time to do better and to grow and learn. Um, I was a way better mom for my kids. And I didn't know it at the time, but I can look back now and see how our entire relationship triggered all of my anxiety. I didn't even know I had anxiety. I just called it stress because that's
Yeah.
way more masculine and cool.
Yeah. Right.
So it took me until like my mid 30s to realize, oh, this is just anxiety.
Yeah. Well,
And my health.
I was
Oh,
gonna say funny story. I mean, I had my first anxiety attack or panic attack when I was going through some challenges myself too, at the age of 38, 39. Never in my life have I had that, and I didn't know what it was the first time. And then after that, I had it for about a year, and then I kind of got refocused and started controlling that. And thank God I haven't had one again. Though I was 38, 39 when shit hit the fans for me, and my life went down south, and it just out of nowhere. Going back to the idea of growing up as a kid, a lot of things coming to mind, and so those things came to fruition, and it just again you just never know, right? You kind of go into those
yeah.
things. So
Well, and I think of it, I call it the spiral of healing. Like,
yeah,
you're at a place to work through some stuff, and then life goes on, and then you get to a place where you're ready to work at the next layer. And so that's why I feel like I could just keep getting better and better because I keep moving along enough where I'm ready. I mean, just last year I was finally ready to go back into therapy specifically to address these things from my childhood. I can compartmentalize like a mofo.
Mm,
And that's what I did.
yeah.
Everything was in boxes. And you think like it doesn't bother me. I don't notice it. I don't feel it. Well, my whole body shut down after I had my
Wow.
third kid. Um, and come to find out I have autoimmune disease. And I love to read. So a great book, Childhood Disrupted, talks about that impact of childhood trauma, especially if it's sustained and sporadic to where you
Hmm.
teach your whole body to just constantly go into stress response and it just tears down the systems in your body. So it's like that the next level of healing. Okay, now I know that although I'm not thinking about it and I don't think it's bothering me, it still affects my entire body.
Right.
And it was hard. Like I really didn't want to go, but it was a great experience and it definitely helped. I had 4 kids by the time I went back. So I had teenager, preteen, and then 2 toddlers. It was way easier to process those memories of 3-year-old me when I can look at this 3-year-old and see how tiny she is and how precious she is and how much I want to protect her and how bizarre it is that there was no one doing that for me when I was that age, because sometimes we just reflect back on it as an adult in our adult brain with our adult logic and our prefrontal
Right.
cortex, and it's just not quite the same. So it's hard. There was a lot of crying almost every day through that period, which I hated. But ultimately, it allowed me to finally process a lot of the stuff that I didn't want to think about.
Yeah, no, that's huge. Now, looking back now, what would be one of your advices? Obviously, you've gone through a lot. You've gone through that healing process. You're still working on that, which I also believe that a part of that is, as you mentioned, you hit to one level and then life hits you, and then there's another one. So I always believe that just like learning, right? You never stop learning, right?
Yeah.
And you may not physically be going to school to get a degree, except you're always learning. You got to listen to this podcast like this, read books, whatever that might be. You got to constantly be learning through your life. And I think it's the same thing with growing, right? And dealing with whatever is going through our lives. Every stage of our lives, we might have a different experience, different people coming in that create some turmoil, and we have to figure that out, right? And so looking back now, you've gone through a lot. What would be an advice or something that you can tell people that might be going through something similar to what you went through, or maybe they're in their teens and they're dealing with stuff that you dealt with, that you can help them get out of that situation? What would be that advice?
Um, I absolutely wholeheartedly believe that they need a third party, whether it's a trusted adult if they're a teenager, right? Because not all parents will let you go see a counselor or a therapist,
Right.
but they don't have to be necessarily a certified professional.
Right.
Um, there's a lot of study on resiliency in childhood is largely dependent on one trusting adult that they can completely confide in.
Mhm.
So I think that's a big part as a teenager. As an adult, go get a therapist.
Yeah, yeah. Right.
I mean, we think we can do it all ourselves. Like,
No.
I totally get that. I mean, I lived most of my life that way, but it just has so many layers of effects within our systems that are completely on an unconscious level.
Right. Yeah. No, and again, and I think as adults, we also tend to see things more from a logical perspective, and a lot of those wounds are in the uh, unconscious, part of our brain, which we really don't tap into, right? Unless
Yeah.
somebody can actually get in there and start uh, looking at every layer by layer, right? So yeah, huge. So you've also are you still working on the tech field? Is that what you're doing right now, or you worked that for a long time?
I am part of the statistics. In the last 3 weeks, I got laid off after 16
Oh
years
my
in the
God.
industry.
Yeah.
Um, I'm glad it didn't happen before now.
Yeah.
Uh, so I've had a side business for a couple of years. And so that's what I'm doing full
Yeah.
time now.
Got you. What's your side business?
So I specialize on working with women in male-dominated industries,
Hmm.
understanding the cost that it comes with and making conscious decisions to be resilient in those spaces. And then the best is people willing to help change those systems
Yeah.
because most of them are broken.
Right. Yeah, definitely. What are your thoughts on that on the topic of being part of the statistics? And the only reason I want to bring that up now is because, again, whichever way, I mean, some people want to be entrepreneurs, some people want to do the 9 to 5, and there's really no right or wrong. It really depends on whatever you want to be. Nevertheless, one thing that just sparked my mind is you said you were there 16 years and laid off right recently. Do you see that as a blessing? Do you see that as like, oh my God, what am I gonna do kind of thing? Like what are your thoughts to that? Because I seen when I used to work for corporate America, I would see people that were working for like 20, 25 years, then they got laid off, and I'm like, that was their whole entire life. And obviously I have my own opinions about that aspect, except 16 years still a long time, right?
Yeah,
And so
yeah. I'm really grateful when I moved into management over a decade ago, I was a single mom at that point. Um, and I had very, very clear priorities. My kids were my utmost
yep.
concern. So the particular person I was interviewing with when I got my first management job was a former military, crazy expectations. And everyone told me, like, don't tell him in the interview that you're not available in the evenings. Like, he'll shut it down. He will not hire you. And I was like, then I don't want the job. So in
Right.
the interview, there was a question about availability. And I said, I'm available outside of 5:30 to 8:30 every evening. I was like, that's when my kids are home. It's my only time with them. And I got the job, which if I hadn't been a single mom, I know my personality. I am a type A overachiever.
Hmm.
I would have given them every ounce of myself.
Yeah.
Um, but because I had to hold that boundary, and then I still got the job and I was able to do my job really well while holding to that boundary, it just taught me early on that I don't have to sacrifice any of those things.
That's good. Yeah.
And then as a manager, I've had to lay off more people than I can count. So
Yeah.
I would always advise my teams, do not sacrifice something for this job that you can never get back because
Right.
it's not worth it.
Right.
But
Yeah.
equally, I worked my ass off. If I was at work, I was at work and I
Right.
did
Yeah.
my best work. And so I don't have any regrets. But instantly, the moment my senior manager told me I was part of the layoff, I I knew I had this picture. I'm a visual person. I had this
Yeah.
picture of God pushing me over the ledge and winking at me, like
That's
it's
awesome. Yeah.
time now. Like I felt like it was too selfish to walk away from my job. I carried all the benefits for all of my family
Mhm.
for all these years. And my husband does contract work, so it's
Yeah.
crazy expensive to
Right.
pay for that, like outside of a corporate job. But we're gonna like he's completely supportive, and I feel like it couldn't have happened before now. I wasn't at a mental COVID totally racked my brain. I mean,
Yeah.
I probably had more breakdowns during COVID than my entire life.
Yeah. Right.
Just the
Yeah.
stress of kids home and trying to keep up with my job. And it was pretty crazy.
Definitely a lot of moving parts, and I always tell people that sometimes from a setback, what seems to be a setback, it's really an opportunity, right? Or from the pain of something, a purpose is born, right? And so
Yeah.
at the end of the day, for you and for many people that have been part of that, I think that they got to see it from that perspective, as you are, is what is the opportunity that we have here coming our way. So that's pretty good. And now you can focus more on your business that you're trying to build and do, right?
Yeah. Well, and I definitely am aware that I have the luxury of that. I'm not a sole breadwinner.
Right.
I definitely my heart goes out to those that it's
Right.
all on them. The
Yeah.
pressure's a lot higher than my situation.
Yeah, no, definitely. So you obviously have done a lot of work, and you've gone through a lot of the therapy and things like that. Um, uh, would you say what has been the biggest thing you've done on to work on yourself? Is it the way you see things? You're working on your mind. What are some of the things that you've done that really had impacted you in a really good positive way?
Um, I think it's been the work that I've done internally that changes the way that I parent.
Mhm.
Because I think it's the knee-jerk reaction as a parent is to parent out of our own anxiety or out of our own trauma. And it was hardest when I was single. And I mean, my ex-husband would send me the nastiest text messages and emails, and trying to stay calm in that space so that I can be grounded as a parent. Like, that was the hardest work probably, but the most profound, that if I could manage to do it then in that situation, then I can definitely do it now when I get to parent out of a much calmer, safer space.
Yeah. No, that's definitely huge. I know, for me, one of the things that I had to do, and going back to that idea, is that internal work, and a lot of people don't see that. And I always tell people that sometimes the biggest battle and the war that's taking place not nowhere in the Middle East or anywhere in the world, is really whatever is going on inside of you. And when you get to deal with that internal battle, then really whatever's outside on the outside of is not going to affect you in any shape or form, right? Or are going to be able to at least attend to that in a different way, and more positively, right? So yeah. So what's next for you? What are some of the things that you're working on next, now that you have this time to work on your business? Are there any specific things that you want to accomplish now?
Yeah, I have some big goals for myself. I think part of it is working with youth. I've worked in the maximum security prison with teenage girls. So it's kind of finding that balance in my time where I need to make some money so that I have that money and that time to go give over here. I work with middle schoolers, trying to aim towards Black and brown and girls to get them into tech. I think it's a wonderful opportunity to break cycles of poverty. I mean, I have a lifestyle way different than any of my family had generations before me. And I think it's an opportunity that they don't always realize is there. So yeah, I mean, there's the ambitions for my business, but my heart really is with helping these kids change their trajectories.
Yeah. Why do you think that people sometimes, even family members, sometimes they don't see the different opportunities that we might have, or that are available, right? Like, why do you feel like people end up limiting themselves of what they can accomplish? Do you think their upbringing, generational things that they've dealt with? What do you think is the reason for that? Because there's a lot of that. There's definitely a lot of that.
Yeah, I think a lot of it just stems from that self-doubt, whether that was planted by their parents, or generations past. It was like, it was wrong to be ambitious. It was, it wasn't humble. I don't know, but I definitely, these kids coming through cycles of abuse. I mean, even if their parents never said the words, the abuse and those actions just teach them to be small and to teach them to shrink or to lash out at others, so it's, they have to work through that. But I think giving them a little bit of light, like, you think, writing code is for these crazy smart computer nerds. No, like, we need kids with mechanical brains writing code, like, we need all these people from these different backgrounds giving their experiences to this code that we write. I mean, AI is scary. All we have to do is just program in the same biases that exist around us every day, and we get no further ahead than we are right now.
Yeah, true. Very true. Kind of going back to what you mentioned of people have that self-doubt, you have here in my comments, and this huge too. And it's a great message. And you're saying we are not less than because of our lives and experiences are starkly different than others around us. We are more powerful because of those experiences that set us apart, right? And I think that that's a great message. And when you're able to recognize that you are more powerful than you think, then at the end of the day, you can create and achieve more for yourself and for others too. The people that truly love you, for that matter. So
it's hard though. It means that we have to talk about these things, to give what light we can to the really dark, horrible situations. But once you do that work, internally. It's a lot easier
Right.
to talk about those
And,
things.
and as you mentioned, it's definitely not easy. And at the same time, though, you have to be able to, you got to be willing to talk about it, and you have to find somebody, a source that you can trust, and be able to openly talk about it. And as you said, once you get to find that group of people, that person, that counselor, or that person that can help you with that, and you start talking about it, as you mentioned, things can start getting better and better. The challenge here is that. Uh, not a lot of people are either seeking for those people that they can find, and or they're just so afraid to even speak up, right? And I think that's the missing element here.
Yeah. It's crazy. The very first time I ever shared my dark testimony was in prison with these girls. It was so hard to get through. I mean, I'm a crier anyway, but to open
Yeah.
up about these things and to say them out loud, it was scary as hell. And I finally got through it. And I think I was pregnant at the time too, so I was extra emotional. And the rest of that day, girl after girl after girl would come up and say,
Wow.
my best friend's older brother, my uncle, I mean, it breaks your heart over and over and over again to hear from these kids and grown women too. I mean, you can sit at a table with women through generations and say, have you ever been sexually assaulted or molested? And most of them will raise their hand.
Wow.
It's just in generations past, you never said a word. Like,
Right.
And now we're finally bringing some of these things into the open, and hopefully getting to a point where we can hold people accountable and break this really
Yeah.
disgusting, horrible cycle of abuse.
Yeah, no, definitely. I totally agree with you. And that's why I always advocate to really finding that group of people, listening to this type of podcast, being able to reach out to somebody, because again, we just don't know what we don't know. People are going through different things in their own heads and their lives, and we cannot just assume. So I was talking to somebody else on a different podcast that we got to be humble. We got to be nice to people, even strangers. When you're out on the store, or doing something, just say a simple hello, or wave at somebody, because that smile, that greeting can make a difference in their lives at that moment, because you just never know what they're going through, right? So
yeah, that's my kids know that my high expectations of them have nothing to do with their grades, nothing to do with sports they might play or whatever they choose to do, and it has everything to do with how do they show up and speak for themselves, and how do they show up and speak for others, whether that's sitting with the person alone at lunch, or these little things that can completely brighten a person's day.
yeah. No, that's huge. So, with your side business, I'm assuming you're obviously always looking for people, or you're working on getting people to work with, right? Um,
Yeah.
yeah. How can people contact you and learn more about what you're doing, how you can help them, and just connect with you on that?
Yeah, I am most active on LinkedIn, I'll admit. You can
Okay.
find me under Katie Shiflett. And then my website will point you back to LinkedIn also, but www.kdpen.com. It's a play on my name.
Yeah.
And those are the two spaces I'm most active. I got some free webinars coming up. I just love connecting with people and
Good.
sharing tangible, practical stuff that can help them from that moment forward.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, definitely. That's huge, and we'll have that contact information on the show notes too. Um, I have a couple more questions for you. Do you now have any daily habits, things that you do on a day-to-day basis to just kind of set you up for the day?
Yeah, so with my anxiety, I have to spend some time just clearing my head and sitting in a quiet space. My kids make fun of me. I had to read a book called The Dutch Art of Doing Nothing because I'm
Mm,
so bad at doing nothing. So that's a big thing for me. I start my day with my cup of coffee and I just sit in my chair and I clear my head, or I pray, or whatever comes to me that morning, but I have to take that time in that space so that I'm grounded for the rest of the day and not acting out of
yeah.
my anxiety, especially right now in this whole new space of a full-time business and no paycheck.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Now, do you just kind of like sit there and just let those thoughts come through and just kind of let them go, or do you also journal them or jot them down?
I journal also, yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah,
I
one of the things that I've heard before, and I've done it too, is the best way that I can describe it is your mind, right? There's so many thoughts going through your head at any given day, right? And out of those thoughts, 90% of them are repetitive from the previous day, and 80% of them are negative. So there's so many things going on, right? And so as you're uh, thinking and being in a quiet place, you start writing down whatever comes to mind. It's just like a computer. You're dumping out all of that stuff so that you can have a clear slate, for the rest of the day. So yeah,
yeah.
cool. And then in terms of you've given us a lot of great tips already. The last question I have for you, for the people that are listening to us and are watching the show, if they're going through any challenge, whatever challenge that might be, what is one thing you can say to them so they can start overcoming that challenge?
I think it's important to speak it out loud, whatever it is. I think sometimes we keep everything inside. I mean, even if the challenge is a prick boss, right? Sometimes, we would call it a sounding board in tech. You're working through this really tough problem, but it's not until you start saying it out loud to somebody else that you're like, oh, I see it. Like I don't know what it is. There's science behind hearing our own voice and saying it out loud. But I think the first thing you have to do is start speaking it out loud to
Yeah.
whoever it might be, your spouse, your best friend, your dog. It really doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I like that. And I think even, talking to yourself in the mirror, and a lot of people find that very weird to do. And I started doing that, a couple years back, and, just never know. I mean, it's also, as you mentioned, there's a science behind being able to speak out loud and hear your voice. More so, I think when you start seeing your own image on the mirror, and you start talking to yourself, and more than anything, like a lot of times we are so hard on ourselves that out of nowhere we're like, oh man, I'm so dumb, oh, I could have done this, whatever, whatever you're saying, right? Now you start looking yourself in the mirror and say, hey, you know what, I love you, or I appreciate you. You start edifying yourself, because if nobody's doing it, you better do it yourself, right? And so that's another good way to, I think, do that in that sense. That's huge.
Well, and I don't know, it was a commercial for something many, many, many years ago, but it was like a 2x4 moment for me. But it was a woman, and you just saw her speaking to somebody else. She said, "You're so fat. You're so ugly. You're so dumb." Like,
Uh-huh.
well, then it turned out that it was just a mirage, and she was talking to herself in the mirror. And it was saying, if you wouldn't say it to your best friend, don't say it to yourself.
Right.
And that was so powerful. I mean, how much do we say things to ourselves that we would never say to our
Right.
worst enemy?
Right. Exactly. Yeah, it's huge. So we got to be able to recognize that. So, Kristena, anything else that you want to say before I let you go?
No, it was great. I loved having this conversation, Cesar.
Good, awesome. Well, thank you again for being here on the show. Really appreciate everything you share with us today. So thank you for being on the show.
Yep. Thank you. Have a great day.
Yeah, and for the rest of you guys, do me a favor. Please make sure that you check out Kristena. We'll have her contact information. And next, make sure that you share this podcast with somebody, because believe me, somebody needs to hear this message. And I'll see you guys at the next episode of You Can Overcome Anything podcast show. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Cesar Espino, real estate investor, business coach, and consultant, and author of the book, You Can Overcome Anything, Even When the World Says No. My number is 424-501-6046. In my book, I talk about making the necessary changes to shift your mind for prosperity and certainty. Pick up your copy at Amazon. I also love helping families with their real estate and can purchase your house fast and all cash. Follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. My number is 424-501-6046.
Thank you for having me today. I am so glad you've tuned into this podcast. You can find me at your favorite podcast platform, where you can like, subscribe, comment, and share. And to learn more about myself, my services, you can find me at www.cesarrespino.com, or you can also find me at your social media. Thanks for joining me, and I am looking forward to having you at the next episode. And know you truly can overcome anything.